I grew up in Boston. It was a tough neighborhood, though. Yeah, it was really hard. Uh, but I did have one bright spot in my neighborhood. I had a garden, and that was between two three-deckers in Boston. And I loved that garden because it was my way of getting away for a little while from the tough neighborhood. Um, yeah, and one day though, I told my father, I said, I want to become a farmer. And my father said to me, Charlie, you never make any money at that. So I did remember that, and I didn't become a farmer. In my college years, I did also had a hard time with a church that I attended for 6 years. It was a 5,000 member church, and it was that was hard too. I can say that they did teach me the Bible, which was good. I'm really happy that they did that. But otherwise, it was difficult, and that that the gardening thing that I loved, but being in a tough neighborhood, and also being part of that 5,000 member church, it didn't make for a very good marriage for me, but otherwise, though, I did end up with two wonderful children and two wonderful grandchildren from that. In my work years, I traveled a lot for work. By the way, I work now in Boston for engineers. I work with engineers. I do low voltage design for hospitals for them. But yeah, I traveled a lot for work. I traveled to Minneapolis and worked in New York City, worked in Calgary in Western Canada, worked in Abu Dhabi in the Middle East, and from there I went to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And I think that experience for a couple of years in the Middle East, it really gave me a heart for Muslims. And that combined with my farming desire, I think that has gotten myself and our micro community that I'm in now, which by the way, it's called Reunion, our micro community, very interested in helping immigrants and refugees in this area. Yeah, so we're even looking into helping refugee farm workers, because there's a lot of farms that are west of Waltham, in the towns west of here. And also we've connected with a nonprofit to look into helping immigrants with English as a second language. So we're looking forward to that. One of the things that really caused that to happen is we have a member of our micro community who one time, about a year ago, he mentioned a tribe in Nigeria that was displaced. And that's one thing that really got us interested in this whole thing too. Yeah. Well, in my travels, as I mentioned, I've been part of a lot of different churches when I traveled for work in those different cities. And I realized even in the micro communities that are here in this area, in the churches, the larger churches that are in this area, that people have begun to focus a lot on administration of the churches because they're connected with a larger body of churches, and they get involved with all the administrative details. Plus, and this is not a bad thing, churches also get involved with people on the other side of the world, trying to help them with poverty and so forth. And that's a great thing. That's a wonderful thing. But I have found that churches in general seem to have, or at least the ones I've been part of, seem to have gotten away from the great value of connecting with their members and connecting with the neighborhood around them, and knowing how to care for that neighborhood. So microchurch is the place, I think, where in the future and now we will bring that back. We'll bring back that caring for the neighborhood and caring for each other, for sure. I have found that the guidance that Renaissance provides is great. And the good thing is that now that these micro-communities we have and the ones that will come here with us and join us in the future under Renaissance, they'll have the experience of the micro-communities that have been experiencing this all along, and we can help each other. We will be able to love ourselves and our micro community and the neighborhood, our neighborhoods, much better when we're connected as a group. We recently had a microchurch symposium about a week ago, actually, and we all participated, and it was great. There was one leader who said, he used the words removal of oppression, healing, and also bringing the kingdom of God. And I think that's by loving each other as a group of micro communities and loving our neighborhoods, that's how those three things are going to be brought to people here in Waltham and beyond. Yeah, I would say go for it. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think you're going to find that a real desire to care for each other. Now, people aren't perfect, right? Obviously, I've experienced that. Even in microchurches, we're all learning. It's a learning experience, and how to care for each other and how to care for the community. We will have differences, but we can work them out and we can agree to disagree. And we will. It's just going to be a great learning experience, and it will help people to know how to bring people to the kingdom of God.
My name is Fabricio Pais. I am from East Boston, Massachusetts. I have lived there basically my whole life, born and raised. I am a husband to Kimberly Pais and father to Oliver and Elijah, two young boys. My parents came to America from Brazil almost 40 years ago now at this point, and came right to Boston from Brazil. I've been a Christian almost my whole life. From a pretty young age, my mom gave her life to Christ before my dad did, actually, and took us to church. As little rascals, me and my brother running around. And it's always been in the Boston area. I actually attended a Portuguese-speaking church for about half of my life, I guess we can say. With my parents being from Brazil, that's the natural community they were a part of and where they felt most comfortable being part of a faith community. And that's a lot of where my foundation came from in terms of learning the Bible, learning how to pray, being baptized, so many of those early moments in our walk. When I was about, 19, 20 years old, I kind of had a turning point where I decided it's time to make what I believe about God, about Christ, my own. And part of that meant leaving that Portuguese speaking faith community and attending, I guess for lack of a better term, just American churches where English was predominant, because that's, really where I felt most comfortable felt called to serve in some capacity in the church. I know we like to use the term leadership. I don't know how comfortable I am saying it that way per se, but from my teenage years, and have always been really involved in serving at church, from being a worship leader to being part of a teaching team, to being on a church board, to being a youth worker, to being church plays. I've been involved in so many different aspects, but hadn't ever quite fully committed and jumped into that calling that I felt in my life. And although growing up, didn't want to be here in Boston as much as I am the biggest champion of our city today, God, one day walking downtown just kind of prompted my heart, my spirit to turn around and look up at the finance district. And I felt this question in my heart of who's reaching these people. And at that moment I knew, even though I didn't want to, that's what God had for my life, and that's what I wanted to do. So I always asked a lot of questions, like I said, and sometimes welcomed, sometimes unwelcomed. Challenging the status quo is not always something that's looked at favorably, but I knew that in my life, the moments where I had grown the most in my faith, where I had grown closest to community, was in a small group. The youth group I attended actually as a teenager was composed of me, my best friend, and my younger brother. There was just the three of us, and our youth pastors, Travis and his wife, Christy. And we really lived life together. They would take us out, to go play laser tag, and we'd have sleepovers at their dorm up on their campus where he was attending seminary, and we would have a lot of hard, real life conversations. We had a lot of hard questions. My brother had really hard questions, and we had to wrestle with those things. And I've found that that's where I believe faith is developing the most in people, and the way we program our Sunday events doesn't allow much for that. And we've created small groups as a mechanism to try to solve that, but still there's a little bit of a barrier in terms of maybe transparency or togetherness or connectedness if you just kind of have random people signing up for groups, right? And micro churches to me really are a place where you can get to know one another, love one another, be involved in people's lives on a day-to-day basis, and develop true community, and to wrestle with sometimes hard topics that we have in Christianity that allows us to continue to grow together and push one another, dare I say, spur one another on, right, into good deeds and to living out the thing we say we believe, because we can't contain our belief system within the four walls of a building and keep drawing people back into that, but instead to give people the ability to go out and live their belief system everywhere they are, where they live, work, and play day to day with their neighbors, at their gym, at the coffee shop, at work, whatever that may be, so that we stop drawing energy and time and resources into programs, and instead we are releasing people to go out and live out their callings in their lives, which every single one of us have. One of the things I share a lot and I say all the time to people is we are better together. I don't believe that any of us can go on this journey individually, because it requires a community to help shape us. It requires community to give us support when we're down. And we need people to, rub ideas off of. Leading a micro church still requires intentionality and planning and making sure people have some markers, placed in front of them to see development and growth in their faith, in their belief. And Renaissance provides a place for us to gather microchurches together to collaborate, to share ideas, to share wins, to share losses, to pray for each other, to share our hurts. This is so important. It's not that we don't need church and community and that it can't even be bigger, but with Renaissance, we have resourcing that's provided to us that, quite frankly, people leading microchurches don't have time. I have a full-time job that I work at 40, 50 hours a week in biotech, and I don't have time necessarily to be putting together documents or charts or plans or discipleship tracks per se, whatever it may be that we need. So we need a group of people who are dedicated full-time to being able to resource our microchurches. And to me, Renaissance is a group of humble, loving, caring people, which are things that matter to me. And if I'm gonna align myself, to a group of people, there was no one other than Renaissance that stood out to me, where I knew that I can push forward this new idea, or really old idea that we're pursuing, to reach our city and to reach our neighbors and to restore, creation back to what it once was.
My name is Victoria, my husband is Jamie, and I'm a mom to Taylor, my son, and my daughter, Molly. We live now in Georgetown, Massachusetts. I grew up in Western Mass and really grew up in church. Both my parents were very involved and are still involved in the church I grew up in. I'm an only child, but a lot of my early memories are being in and around church, whether it was joining my parents for whatever ministry they were involved in or church events. My life very much was revolved around church, 3 or 4 times a week. And not having like a huge family, my family was really my close friends at church. And they're people that I'm still very close with now. When I left home and went to college, I found a church out in this area, same denomination, and got plugged in. And really up to that point, I had been very in a bubble as far as my church experience went. Not a whole lot of diversity, and just kind of thought that this was the way that everyone did church and followed Christ. And the college that I went to was non-denominational, so it was like a big mixing pot of people who loved the Lord, but just did it very differently than anything I had ever experienced. So that was really kind of the start of having this idea that there are different expressions of the church. So I went to that church out there for my college years, and at the end of my college career, my senior year, I met and married my husband, and we continued going to that church for probably another year or two. And it was a fairly large church, but we had a really hard time getting plugged in there. And again, with just everything about the way that I grew up being plugged into the body of Christ was really important to me. Not just for being a part of a community, but also feeling, like I wanted to serve a part of that as well. So we had tried a bunch of different ministries at the church, tried different groups, and just couldn't find our people. So we found out that church was going to be doing a church plant in another town near us. So we thought, well, maybe in this smaller setting, we can find a deeper community and really just be a part of something that, maybe we could give back to. So we did that, and we really had a wonderful experience at that church. We made lifelong friends that we're still very, very close with, and we do life with. And we were part of that church for about 10 or 12 years. Around 2018, I had started just, for lack of a better word, going through some deconstruction of ideas that I had been handed around my faith and the way that church is done, the way that following Christ looks like. And I was working through some spiritual resources and had reached out to a couple friends at the church and said, hey, do you want to walk through this with me? I feel the need to be disciples together and work through some of this stuff. And at the time, nothing came of it. So I just kept plugging away at it, and about a year later, a friend that I had reached out to came back and said, hey, my husband and I had listened to some of these resources that you sent, we want to meet and talk through them. So we started meeting, my husband and I and her husband, in January of 2020, before the world shut down. We started just meeting over FaceTime. We'd put our kids to bed and then just hop on and just kind of talk through all of these ideas that were kind of very different from just the church life experience that we had growing up. And so then the world did shut down in March of 2020 with COVID, but we just kept right on going because we had already been meeting virtually. And through that year, it's probably about 9 or 10 months of us just meeting together and trying to figure out what God had next for us. And we were still very involved in the church that we were part of. I was leading worship. My husband and I had been on the board any number of years. And so we felt this kind of pull towards something different, but we didn't know what it was. And so we finally made the decision to step back from the church, not really knowing what was next. And so very quickly after, God brought us Renaissance, and here we are. So I'm really grateful for all of the different expressions of church that I had an opportunity to be a part of. One of the things that I think the traditional church does really well is this idea of the church gathered. We're able to meet together and to worship and to encourage each other, and I really valued that a lot. So much so that we were really involved. Like I said, I was leading worship. I was on the board. I was running a women's ministry outside of the church as well, to the point where I almost didn't have time to be Christ to my neighbors or to other people that I came in contact with. I remember there was a instance where one of my neighbors had a baby, and I was thinking in my head, I really want to bring her a meal. But I was so just tapped out at the time between, gathering at church on Sunday. We're meeting at church throughout the week for worship practice and board meetings and small groups. And I had no bandwidth to just be Christ to my neighbors. And so the microchurch expression has allowed us to not be just the church gathered, but also to be scattered and to have that margin to be able to just be a good neighbor and to build relationships and be Christ to the people that we come into contact with. It's felt very different than any ministry experience I've ever been a part of, and I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around what ministry is, because it doesn't, my history has always been it's in a church building or it's part of a program, but our ministry expressions through our microchurch have been, being able to, we run a garden at a couple different communities in Georgetown. We run one at a low-income housing and then at an elderly housing. And I think this year we're going to be able to run one at the senior center, youth center as well. So just being able to rub shoulders with people in those environments has allowed us to just see needs where they are and help them. So being part of the church gathered is really important to me, and it's really important to me to be plugged in. And the other family that we do this micro church with, feels very similarly, and grew up in the church as well. And so when we decided to step back from our church, we kind of felt like nervous, like we didn't want to be like we were going off on our own and starting some sort of cult. Like we wanted to be still very much plugged into somebody who would keep us accountable and keep us moving in the right direction, motivate us, and call us out when we needed to be. So when we came across Renaissance, that's really what we're looking for, like looking for a larger body to be a part of, to be accountable to, but also just to learn from and to do kind of this journey together with. Renaissance has been a blessing to us, like everyone who is a part of the leadership of Renaissance. I think they're very hesitant to call themselves leaders, but they're very easy to follow as leaders because there's just they're servant leaders, and there's a lot of humility, and there's a lot of talk about the priesthood of all believers, and I think Renaissance really lives that out, and there's not